This episode is brought to you by Windrose Recovery, a family of premier addiction treatment programs in southeastern Wisconsin. Privately owned, Windrose Recovery offers a full continuum of personalized care for those struggling with addiction, including the Manor for residential treatment, Midwest Detox for inpatient detoxification, and Windrose Counseling for outpatient treatment. With highly personalized treatment focused on trauma, Dr. Chantelle Thomas and her expert team offer an authentic experience, creating the kind of deep emotional change that's crucial for long-term recovery. If you or someone you love is struggling with addiction, call Windrose Recovery at 414-409-5300. You can learn more about Windrose Recovery by clicking the link in the show notes or by visiting windroserecovery.com. Thank you for listening to The Path to Authenticity. My name's Tom Gentry. I think of the show as the opposite of small talk. You'll hear real conversations with real people who know who they are. We talk about what makes them who they are, how they became who they are, and how we might become truer expressions of who we are.
I'm Dr. Todd Kammerzelt, and this is The Path to Authenticity.
Nowhere to run, nothing to hide from the government's prying eye. Take yourself a summer holiday.
The Path to Authenticity proudly supports the I Speak Media Foundation, advancing media literacy education through an evolving series of outreach programs within the communities that need it most. For more information, visit ispeakmedia.org. If this is your first time here, thanks for checking it out. If not, thanks for coming back. I'm Tom Gentry. This is The Path to Authenticity. If you're willing, please take a few minutes to fill out our listener survey. There is a link in the show notes. Just looking for a little feedback, always looking to improve the show any way I can. So, February 16th, 2021, episode 110. On this day in 1903, the ventriloquist Edgar Bergen was born. In 1941, Kim Jong-il. In 1944, the novelist Richard Ford, Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist of The Sports Writer and Independence Day, born in 1944. On 1958, the rapper Ice-T was born. In 1987, the freshman senator from Georgia, John Ossoff, was born. In 1989, the actress Elizabeth Olsen. And in 1990, the musical artist The Weeknd. On this day in 1862, Fort Donelson in Tennessee fell to U.S. Grant, but not before Nathan Bedford Forrest and his cavalry escaped. In 1865, the city of Columbia, South Carolina, surrendered to federal troops. In 1923, Bessie Smith made her first recording, Downhearted Blues. In 1937, DuPont patented nylon. On this day in 1954, the FBI arrested 10 members of the Ku Klux Klan in North Carolina. And in 1959, in Havana, Fidel Castro took the oath to become the Cuban premier. So, This episode features an addiction psychiatrist named Dr. Todd Kammerzelt. And this was a really nice conversation to have on a Saturday morning. I really enjoyed it. Had a few laughs. And, you know, he's somebody who I could see myself chumming around with. It's funny, you know, there are a couple things we talked about. In particular, a story that I tell about myself that I always thought was kind of unique. I've never had anybody say, oh yeah, I had that happen too. But there was a story like that in this episode. But it was just a lot of fun, and I really appreciate him doing this with me. So I hope you enjoy it. Dr. Todd Kammerzelt. How you doing today?
I'm well. How are you?
Not too bad. It's it's the Saturday of inauguration week. It's been a pretty good week. I feel like for a lot of us there it feels like there's kind of been some air let out of the balloon, and I don't find myself looking for, what's happening now like I was last week or for the last 4 years. So I feel pretty good.
Yeah, there changes is definitely in the air. I noticed I've woken up a little calmer, less apprehension when I turn on the news or look on my news feeds each morning. So that there's a notable settling for me that I've been experiencing as well, at least at the start of my day.
Yeah. And what I'm hopeful about is no matter where you fall on the political spectrum, it's pretty evident how different it feels, and my hope is that everyone recognizes that, it's better. This is better, to not be in constant conflict or, constant chaos, or it's been a pretty emotionally chaotic time. And it makes me think about, what it's like to be in the presence of like an abusive person. There's this kind of dark cloud that hangs over, and I feel like that's what we've been going through for a while,
Yeah, certainly since, kind of the immediate run up to the election in November, and kind of since that time, there's just been this tension, incredible tension in the air. And I think it's the uncertainty, right, that keeps your body in this constant state of vigilance, and always on guard and ready to kind of protect or flee or fight back. It's exhausting.
It is. So why don't you tell everybody what you do?
So I work as an addiction psychiatrist. I have a couple of different hats that I wear. My main role is at a organization called Midwest Detox. I'm the medical director. We provide acute withdrawal management and stabilization for folks in the community, also folks coming outside the community who are going to be entering our long-term residential program called the Manor. And so I kind of work as the medical director, kind of medically stabilizing people, introducing them to concepts of recovery, and then also act as a consultant for the Manor, which is our residential program. And I've been exploring with a colleague some work with psychedelic assisted psychotherapy as well, which is kind of a new and evolving area that's been gaining momentum based on some encouraging clinical trial results across the country and internationally.
Awesome. So how did you, I can't imagine you as an 8-year-old thinking, I want to be an addiction doctor. Like, how did this come about?
Yeah, no, that's fair question. I often kind of reflect on my path to getting here. It was, a lot of people have different directions that they initially start off on. I think from my early days, Tom, my goal was to be an FBI agent. I wanted to be this kind of secret agent of the FBI or the CIA. And I would that's what would motivate me when I was in my room as a 12-year-old doing push-ups or wall squats, or I had found out what the physical fitness standards were, and I had those in my room. And so whenever I needed to kind of draw inspiration, I was like, this is what I want to do. This is going to what is going to encourage me or get me past the finish line, or to do 5 more minutes of wall squats or something like that. So it's been a kind of circuitous route. Absolutely. So much so that I initially went off to college thinking I was going to study criminal justice and enter kind of law enforcement and make my way to the FBI or some type of government agency. So I kind of yearned for this sense of adventure, mystery, or what I perceived life in that work in that life to be, which of course is kind of very different than what I had romanticized as a kid. But I went to college, and you can see how kind of out of step I was. I got there and met with my academic advisor, and he said, well, that's a good goal, Todd, but I don't know if you checked our syllabus or not, but we actually don't offer a degree in criminal justice.
You you missed a little bit of research there when you were.
And I said, well, thank you. That's good. That's good to know. And please don't tell my parents, because that's what they think I'm here doing.
Oh my
They sent me across the country so there was a few kind of shifts within that, and went into sociology, and then eventually into economics and kind of a quantitative economics, which still in my mind was related in as much as it really helped me to kind of follow my interest in understanding people. And I think that was really the thread kind of through that, is how do I better understand the world around me and understand people's behaviors? And so from there, my interest, I kind of had some diversions before formally going the medical training route. But in the back of my mind, it was really, how do I connect with people? How do I understand people? How do I get an appreciation for their behaviors and motivations that influence the way they behave?
Mm-hmm. Which is, entirely relevant to what you do now.
It is, yeah. So as went to medical school, kind of looked at a few different specialties within medicine, ended up pursuing psychiatry due to some really influential senior residents that I interacted with as a medical student who were psychiatrists. And from there, kind of subspecialized in addiction psychiatry. And so, again, I think that really, I spend a lot of space thinking about how to influence behavior, how to help people understand their own behaviors. And where we can kind of intervene to help people improve their quality of life and make the choices that are kind of most healthy for them.
Wow. Well, so Secret Agent Todd.
Yes.
It's funny. I didn't have the same sort of, one of the things that's really interesting to me about listening to you is just the drive as a kid that you had, that, when you latch onto an idea and then you start exercising. And I think about similar experiences that I had as a kid, and that's just a really powerful sort of force within a human being that, you want something and I'm going to fight for it. And, so it's really, it's nice to hear those sorts of things about people. And I imagine your colleagues, don't know that you wanted to be a secret agent, so they'll be happy that I uncovered this little tidbit.
Yes, it is. It is. There are very few. Well, up until now, there were very few people who knew that.
Now the secret's out.
Apparently, yes.
Yeah, but I never really. Me, it was more I wanted to be a baseball player, and but at one point, I was always good with language, and took the test to get in the military a couple times at the behest of recruiters. And eventually, I almost went into a linguistics program that would have required me to sign up for 6 years of military service. But, it would have been the same sort of path, intelligence and all that. I had a family member who had done that, and it seemed really exciting to me, but ultimately, I knew, wow, the way you drink, like, you don't need to be in another country without somebody's supervision. That right. Might not be good. Sure. So,
absolutely.
So I ended up, just the way things fell out, deciding not to do it. And, here I am. Life is really interesting. And one of the things that I've learned about, career stuff, especially, I used to feel like there was something wrong with me because I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. Like, there are people I know people who wanted to be an art therapist at 13 years old, and then at 40, that's what they've been doing for the last 20 years,
Sure.
Yeah. And I've never been that person. And I think especially guys, like, if we don't know, there's almost an expectation that at 18 years old, you're kind of supposed to know what you're going to do. And if you don't, then I encounter a lot of people, and I felt this way, who feel like there's something wrong with them if they don't know. And for me, what I learned is that that's not how I work. It's just not. The way I work is I kind of go through life and I respond to things. And when I see opportunities, I seize them and I feel my way through stuff. And it actually works out pretty well for me. And things happen that I couldn't have planned. I think a lot of times we limit ourselves if we do stick to the plan.
Well, and it's interesting, as you're saying that, and I'm thankful that there are people who are kind of laser focused and they kind of go from A to B and kind of can start, getting their fulfillment and kind of, filling their lives meaningfully and contributing to society in a kind of very organized and direct route. And I agree. For me, that wasn't the case. Sometimes people have that focus very early on. I think sometimes that orderliness or kind of structure is imposed from elsewhere. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. You talked about kind of your thoughts or consideration in joining the service and doing intelligence work. And so I think I took the ASVAB probably 3 or 4 different times over the course of my life as a high school student. And then, kind of after college and then around medical school. And at one point I went as far as kind of going down to, I think it's MEPS is the kind of center where you get processed, and kind of went through that kind of physical examination. And so there were a number of different points in my life where I was considering that as well. And similarly, my father was in the service. So and his brother, and another relative and a couple of cousins. And so there was this sense of, duty to country, right? Mm-hmm. And behaving in an altruistic way and giving back. And so there's, trying to figure out how for me to fulfill that kind of sense of obligation, I wrestled with at different points in my life. And ultimately, I think I shared with you, I joined the Peace Corps after college. And ended up teaching math in West Africa.
Wow.
So that, for me, that was kind of how I was able to satisfy or feel like I was fulfilling that kind of family role or family obligation.
So it's so interesting. I don't know if I've heard the term MEPS since those days. But, I was kind of, I didn't have a ton of direction when I got right out of high school. I decided I wasn't going to go straight to college. I was going to take a year off, and I ended up, working full time in construction. And, meanwhile, I had taken the ASVAB twice. And after the second one, there was a different recruiter than the year before, and he just kind of wouldn't leave me alone and said, your scores, like you could be a linguist if that's what you want, and there's, but there was another test that had to be taken called the D-Lab, Defense Language Aptitude Battery.
Yes, I took that. Yes.
But you only get to take that at MEPS, right? Which is it's the last stop before you ship out.
Yeah.
If you don't know what MEPS is. So, but for this, and he told me he didn't know of anyone who did better on that. Like, I crushed it. And, but in order to go into this training program where it was something crazy, like over the course of 8 months, you learned 6 different languages. And it was this, base in Monterey, California, where you would go. And, but you had to have top secret clearance before, or you didn't get to go into that program. And so I end up, taking the test, doing well, basically did everything but the oath. And I'm sitting outside the office of the one guy at MEPS who can give me a top secret clearance. And, being a guy who's had some, substance abuse, history at that time, there were people who knew I had smoked pot and stuff. And this recruiter told me, yeah, you don't want to tell them that. And meanwhile, I had this uncle who was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. And so, I know that the FBI shows up and asks, people were going to come around and ask questions. And so I was scared, he basically told me I should lie about it. And so that was what I was most worried about going into this whole process. So I'm sitting outside this guy's office for an hour waiting for this security interview. And I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. And every time somebody comes by, I ask them, what's going on here? And then finally somebody told me, there's only one guy here who can do it, and he's on vacation.
No, you're kidding.
No. And I thought, well, there's my sign. Like, Tom's not supposed to go into Army intelligence. So,
oh my goodness.
So yeah, it was a long ride home with the recruiter. It was an hour away. He had to come pick me up and take me home. And he was pissed and like, just, kept trying to convince me over the phone before he drove there and finally I was just like, listen, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Sorry. And it's funny, my dad had a conversation with my uncle after that and kind of told him about it. Part of me wishes I'd talked to him about it, but he said, that guy shouldn't have told him to lie. It's not like smoking pot is that big a deal these days. Like,
right.
That if they turned away everybody who smoked pot, then they wouldn't have a very big pool of people to choose from. So but it just it was interesting. It was probably one of the first times in my life when I really thought, well, this is like an intuition thing and I need to listen to it. But it seemed like a pretty clear sign that I shouldn't do that. But yeah, it's funny because I don't know if I've ever met anyone else who got all the way to MEPS and then didn't go in the service.
Yeah. Well, and my score on the D lab. So I really was looking again to do some kind of less common language, and really kind of challenge myself. And I took the test, and like, yeah, you could maybe learn Spanish or German.
Oh, that wasn't your thing.
And so no, I just it was I did not test well on that, and so at that point I was like, well, I don't need to go into the Army's special language program to learn Spanish or French or German. So.
Well, and if you're listening to this, like, that is, I don't think I've ever taken a more difficult test than that. It's an auditory test that consists of an imaginary language where it's 100 questions. The first 10, they give you 2 grammar rules that things like verbs begin with LA, and then they play the sentence 4 different times, and you have to choose which one is grammatically correct. Then after 10 questions, they add 2 more rules, and on and on and on until you get to 100. And it's all just, if you listen to this, it's just all nonsense. It's not a language. It's completely imaginary. So it's not like, Dr. Todd, like, is, some kind of dummy for not acing the D lab. It's just, some of us, our brains work that way and some don't. And for whatever reason, mine does. And it's probably, I've just always loved language too. It's, studied Spanish in high school, and I've always written. And, so yeah, I've always been more kind of inclined to that kind of stuff. And yeah. D lab, MAPS. This is great. I love this. So, all right. So you decide to become an addiction psychiatrist. What's that like to be an addiction psychiatrist in the medical profession compared to all the other choices for specialty? Where does it fit into the pantheon of being an MD?
Yeah. So I think certainly these days, right, there's been a lot of attention, a lot of resources given towards treating addiction, right? I mean, it is a very kind of front and center in public policy these days. So, right, that's exciting. It's exciting to be a part of that space where that it feels like for decades has been under-resourced and kind of unrecognized as a medical condition. And so for the longest time, obviously, it's been viewed as kind of a personal choice, a moral failing, and inadequacy within the person. And so it's exciting to be a part of this space at this time, where there's really been a shift in focus to this is a disease model approaching and understanding addiction. The addiction psychiatry piece, I think, has helped tie, at least for me, the space that often exists between psychiatry and the traditional medical specialties. It's helped as a bridge to connect those two fields for me. So that's also been exciting. I don't want to kind of get into a long history of the specialty of psychiatry, but it kind of broke off a long time ago from the traditional medical fields, just by virtue of the type of intervention that was done, aside from kind of ice picks up, to the orbit to change what's going on in brain connectivity. There really was very limited, and aside from ECT, there was limited kind of hands-on intervention, unlike in many other kind of specialties. So it kind of went down its different path, and I think for me as an addiction psychiatrist, there tends to be this rejoining of the fields. And so that's been really exciting.
Yeah. Well, with addiction, there's this undeniable physiological aspect. And so if you're a general practitioner and, you know how to lower someone's heart rate, you know how to stabilize their vital signs, but, then they just go right back out and do the same thing all over again and come back. I mean, it kind of makes sense to me. It would then kind of drift into, those more physically minded doctors kind of being a little more open to, the psychological or psychiatric aspect of things. When before, is it fair to say that most MDs kind of looked at psychiatry as kind of quackery in the beginning?
Or just didn't really know how to kind of incorporate or understand it in the kind of traditional Western medical model. I guess is how I would say. Yeah.
Okay.
And certainly there have been, I'm not going to try and defend all of psychiatry. There has been a lot of curious approaches kind of within the field, and certainly kind of going back to the 1930s and 40s kind of abuse and misuse of kind of medicine to either validate or try and justify differences among groups of people, and using doctors to kind of do things that are kind of immoral to support one point of view or another.
Well, and the thing is that there's such a hunger to understand why someone would behave this way when it comes to addiction, right? It's so baffling. I've found in my career people just wanting to latch onto some sort of explanation. So, and often to them, that would come from the medical realm. But it's just, it has been very misunderstood or, maybe understood for a long, long time. And that, so I started basically working in the addiction treatment industry in 98. And I think 96, 97 was when, OxyContin came out.
Sure.
So, and it was also around the time that the, American Medical Association first recognized pain as a vital sign.
Yes.
So isn't it amazing how those two things happened at the same time?
Indeed.
Lot of lobbying going on there, but I worked for Hazelden. That was my first,
okay, sure.
and which, has a huge publishing arm and also a research arm, the Butler Center for Research.
Okay.
And they did a lot of research around, education among physicians relating to addiction. And it was back then, it was something crazy like someone who becomes a physician has something like 3 hours of education related to addiction. Not 3 credit hours, but 3 hours.
Right. Total hours throughout. Yeah.
And, documented that and also had this really strong initiative of training doctors. So we would bring in doctors and have them sit in on stuff. Like we had a partnership with Dartmouth at one time where, they would send their medical students and it began with the doctors at the medical school who taught, So, yeah, but I think that really changed with the opioid epidemic. Yeah. It had to. If you look at the way things have gone over the last 20 years, you had the period of time where there were all the pain doctors, the pain clinics who were overprescribing. And the other thing that happened is when we finally got a handle on all that, we didn't handle it very well. We just shut them all down. So then if you know anything about addiction, you have a ton of opiate addicts now with nowhere to go. essentially their drug dealer has disappeared. And so, of course, what they're going to do is turn to street drugs like heroin. So that's it. Kind of the rebound of dealing with the pain clinics is where where the heroin problem has worsened in this country. And, it's just been such a terrible thing to watch. It's been a mess, but if this is one good thing that has come of it, is that doctors have been forced to gain a better understanding of addiction. And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's hard to, across all the specialties, you'd be hard pressed to find docs who are not kind of faced with either the kind of direct decisions about prescribing or the consequences of colleagues prescribing as it relates to kind of opioids and pain medications.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's been in their interest to educate themselves just to cover their tails because they don't want to get in trouble. And then the other thing is, I mean, so the pain clinics closed, and not that this didn't happen before, but if any of you have heard the term doctor shopping, I mean, drug addicts go to doctors demanding and lying about symptoms to try to, so it's, doctors have to deal with addiction one way or another, almost invariably. And so it's kind of like a decision of where they're going to go with it. Are they going to be Dr. Todd and become an addiction psychiatrist? Or are they just going to say, I don't work with drug addicts, or, it's there. It's so prevalent in our society. And, I'm hoping that the other thing that comes with all this is that the stigma is reduced, because I mean, even before the opioid epidemic, we all had someone in our family who suffered with an addiction issue. It's just a matter of whether we're willing to recognize it and acknowledge it or not.
And it's been really hard. I mean, don't take this the wrong way, but it's been really heartening, to have families. Invariably, the disease of addiction claims lives, right? And what I've seen is a dramatic increase in retelling the story of a person's life, often kind of through obituaries or through eulogies. There's a much greater likelihood now that if it's related to addiction, that will be mentioned during that piece, in an effort to want to educate and destigmatize and acknowledge, right? This is an illness that is serious, that takes lives and kind of affects people much more broadly than we used to want to believe.
There was an obituary in the New York Times this week, and I can't remember the name of the person. It was a young adult male who was like a YouTube celebrity or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it mentioned that he overdosed. And it wasn't like a news story. It was like an obituary, which is different. Families put together obituaries.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it struck me because you're right. I mean, one of the things that came up in a training I took, 20 some years ago is if, it never says he was an alcoholic in the obituary. At least then it didn't. It would say things like heart failure or liver failure, or, but if, I mean, and to that point, a lot of doctors would see symptoms like this, and because they had no education on addiction, they didn't connect the dots.
Right.
But these are physiological manifestations of an addiction.
Clear, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty clear what the source is.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also, having done this for a long time, and especially having worked in residential treatment facilities where you see people who I recognize it more with alcohol, where you can see the broken capillaries in their face. You can see the coloration of their skin. Like I go through life and I can see people who have alcohol problems without having a conversation with them. You can see them and so if you're a physician, it stands to reason that you ought to be able to, to do that, and I think more and more it's happening, I feel like medicine, it's becoming healthier and healthier, right? The emotional aspect of things is much more recognized than also.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, any big goals for Todd? I mean, you going to write a book or anything like that?
Oh, goodness. Wow. So, wow, that is, it's a great question. I think what I would like to do, I'm still, so we're about the same age, kind of mid to late 40s. So I still feel I have a few years to contribute to the field, kind of in a full-time capacity, doing what I can. What I see, oh gosh, maybe in 15 years, 10 years, is to do some work internationally as providing, my medical service and expertise, whether that is, and again, this kind of, I just can't quite let it go, whether it's doing some work as a physician in the Foreign Service or doing some work as a physician through kind of locum tenens internationally, to try and continue to grow and explore. Right. The other thing that I really enjoy, and I've been trying to get an understanding of, kind of really what my motivations are and what sustains me over time. And I, kind of over the course of my life, I've looked back and said, well, what is it that kind of drives me? And I think this sense of, certainly meaningful connections, right? Kind of relationships are important. And then also, kind of believing that my efforts are helping people in some way. And then just kind of challenging myself. Early on, it was kind of physically, right? Mentally, and more recently, it's really about kind of expanding emotional and spiritual bounds, and how can I continue to grow and kind of brush up against what's comfortable and continue to explore those kind of comfort levels that I have.
Well, one thing that is over the last decade or so is beginning to become less true is that America is definitely on the cutting edge of addiction treatment compared to the rest of the world. The abstinence approach is not very prevalent in Europe. I mean, there's so many cultures who, from adolescence drink wine with every meal or what, it's just a different mindset. And, and I mean, I'm sure that you have worked with patients from Europe. I mean, I have many over the years, and, by and large, Europeans, if they want addiction treatment, come to the United States for it. And so I'm sure that there has to be a substantive way for you to kind of carry your message outside of the country and make some sort of definitely meaningful contribution in a way that kind of feeds that hunger that you have for, I don't know, what would you call it? Just excitement or being outside of this culture, or what is it exactly that you kind of
I think
for?
Yeah, I think it's, just this sense of kind of, curiosity about kind of growth and exploration, really. And, I really feel that I've grown a lot in different experiences, and I didn't necessarily have an intent going into them, but just being in a space that's unfamiliar, that is at times uncomfortable, helps me to connect with a broader group of people, because it pushes me outside of, what I grew up knowing, and forces me to kind of confront some of my beliefs, some of my, assumptions, and often they get reshaped and changed, and I think expanded in a broader view. And so that it's just helpful to be able to connect with a broader group of people if you have a broader life experience.
Now, what did you grow up knowing? Where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Sheboygan, yes, a small town between Milwaukee and Green Bay on Lake Michigan.
Wow. And then where did you ship off to school? Where'd you go?
Yeah, so my first kind of foray outside of Sheboygan, I was an exchange student in high school to Australia. Wow. And I lived with a family there for a year. Yep, kind of radically different.
And then you came back to Sheboygan.
Then I came back to Sheboygan. Yeah, I finished. So Australia, being in the Southern Hemisphere, was, their academic year. Summer is December, January, February or something. So I left mid-year, my sophomore year in high school, and returned in the middle of my junior year in high school. And I went down to Tulane in New Orleans for my undergraduate work. And again, kind of this rube from Wisconsin heading down south to New Orleans, which at that time, gosh, this is in the late 90s, was, I think, the city with the highest kind of murders per capita at the time. So it was a very alarming, right? It was pretty alarming to my parents that I was going to be going down there. This is when, I had sold them on pursuing criminal justice and joining the FBI, right? And so, and then from there, I studied abroad in England for a semester, came back, finished up college and entered the Peace Corps and taught math. Actually, was able to teach in a foreign language. I taught in French in West Africa, in Burkina Faso. As a math teacher there for a while. So.
Yeah, it's funny. Having grown up in Indiana, there's this attitude about major cities about, oh man, why would you ever want to go there? Like New Orleans and the crime, and I remember having a neighbor who had to go to New York City for some reason, and that's how he looked at it. Like he had to go to New York. And I remember, being a really little kid and hearing this grown man call New York City the armpit of America. And to be fair, it was before New York City cleaned up a lot and became what it is now. But even if I mention to my mom, going down to Miami, I lived an hour away in West Palm Beach. Oh my God, you're going to Miami? Why?
Right.
And I'm sure. So when you mentioned your parents being kind of, thinking it's curious, you want to go to New Orleans, I can definitely understand that.
Yeah. Growing up, Sheboygan is a pretty, at least when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, is a pretty homogenous town as far as kind of the way people looked. There is certainly some kind of class divide, but primarily a blue collar town that kind of worked with, folks had kind of solid middle class, long-term jobs. I think my dad worked for the same company for 42 years or something until he retired. So his mantra was always just get a job. You can survive anything if you have a job, and just kind of be loyal to your company. And that was kind of what worked for him as he, kind of worked in the factory in different positions for 40 some years after he got out of the Navy.
Well, and it's funny to me, I hear that and I think that's a collective sort of trauma response to the Great Depression. That's what happened, right? I mean, I'm the youngest of 8. My dad was born in 25.
Mm-hmm.
So he grew up in the thick of it.
Yeah.
Like bread lines, the whole 9 yards. Didn't eat chicken his whole adult life because that's the only meat they could afford to eat when he was a kid, when they could have, I mean, it was, it was bad. And so there's, part of the reason why I feel like there's a need for a podcast like this, which to me is essentially about you deserve to be who you are. You deserve to do what you want to do with your life, is because there's been this collective response of get a job, be loyal to the company. And, as long as you go to work and, without having the luxury to think about what am I doing? Who is it serving? Why am I doing it? Is this really what I want to do? But now, we're at a different place where, I mean, I'm really hoping that this whole pandemic thing doesn't create the same sort of scenario where so many people have to struggle financially that we go back to just the grind,
survival mode.
Survival mode.
No, that's a really good point. I hadn't considered that, right, as a either kind of direct trauma response that one lived through, or kind of proximate, like your parents lived through it, and that's the mindset that was handed down. Right. It's just
scarcity mindset,
stability and safety. And
which, for me, what I'm learning in my own personal development is that, that scarcity mindset just, really blocks you from abundance, to go through life because so much of life is what we project onto it, what our thinking, how we see what we think we see, if we're looking for good, we're going to see good. If we're looking for abundance, we're going to find it. And if we're looking for scarcity, we're going to find that too.
Yeah. Right. Or if we're looking for threats, we're going to try and protect what we have. Right. And that prevents you from kind of exploring or having curiosity outside of your immediate, kind of needs or what you need to protect. It really kind of limits you.
Yeah. Well, so you've had an interesting life. I love this, by the way. I felt like I've learned so much about you, and I appreciate you being so forthcoming, and I've enjoyed it. So looking back on your life, when was there a time when the younger Todd needed some support, advice the most? When was that? And what would you go back and tell him? Was it MEPS? Was it then?
I think, that's a great question. There's, I think probably the time that I felt kind of most alone, or most, just adrift, maybe not adrift, but certainly most alone, was actually when I was in the Peace Corps, when I was teaching math in a rural kind of town in West Africa. I was living in a cinder block hut with a corrugated metal roof. It was 2 rooms. There was no electricity. There was no plumbing. There was no running water. I had a loose grasp on French, and I was teaching math. I was teaching math and French, and I had no grasp on the local language, which was not French. French was the official language. And there was just this real sense of aloneness that I felt. And that was a really difficult time for me. There was some meaning in, kind of serving this community that I was trying to be a part of, but culturally had very little awareness of. Certainly looked very different. I remember trying to go, if I say into town, that kind of makes it sound much larger than it was, but I kind of took the road from the school into the market area to try and get my hair cut after a couple of months. And I went into the hut where the barber was, and he looked at me and he's like, I can't cut your hair. And I said, what do you mean you can't cut my hair? He's like, well, I don't know how to cut your hair. I'm not familiar with your hair. I don't know.
Because you're white, I assume, right?
Because I was white. Yeah. Because I was white and my hair is kind of more fine. And so, and I think he was really conscientious and didn't want to kind of do a bad job or have me be unhappy with whatever the haircut was. So at that point, I went back to my place, got out my Swiss Army knife and started cutting my hair and kind of cut all my hair off. And then kind of that looked, of course, awful. And so I proceeded to lather up my head and shave my head. And at that point I was like, all right, Todd, we maybe need to just kind of slow down, kind of can't exactly back up from what just happened, but things are getting a little bit tense. You're feeling, kind of isolated and adrift. And so I think if I could go back to that time, I'd really try and encourage myself and remind myself to be patient, to try and be calm, to fight this kind of internal urge to A, flee, or B, kind of do something dramatic or impulsive. And I think you really kind of just coach me to say, hey, Todd, you have the internal resources to not only kind of survive and persist in this environment, but to really excel and thrive, right? And so part of it is just kind of slowing down and recognizing that within us, we all have the resources. They may not always be available. The kind of internal, emotional, and kind of spiritual resources I'm talking about, not external resources, but that really we have our own kind of internal capacity to either heal or kind of persevere when things get difficult, to come out the other side. And it's just, I think for me at that point, I wasn't able to, I didn't have that type of language or that understanding. But B, as a 20-something, early 20-something year old male, like I could have used some advice in slowing down, and recognizing, hey, things are going to be okay. Yeah. You don't need the answers right now. And being able to sit with the dis-ease of aloneness, like things are going to get better. You're a pretty well-resourced guy and this is going to be okay.
Well, it's funny. I don't know about you, but I like my age now. Uh-huh. I mean, I guess there's part of me that wishes I could, be perceived as younger. I don't know, but of course nobody wants to get old, but, the wisdom that comes with it, because I think about what I felt like at that period of my life. And, we talk about how young people kind of think they know everything I wasn't arrogant in that way. I think how I would describe it for myself as not that I thought I knew everything, but I thought that everything I knew was all there was to know.
Sure.
And that, there's all this life experience that I hadn't had before. I only had my own experience to draw from. So we just don't know what's possible. And it can feel pretty like, I don't know, it can feel pretty, stifling. And, I think about it when I see young guys who I work with who are 22 and they're trying to learn how to be abstinent from alcohol or drugs. And they think because they're behind a year in college, all of a sudden that their lives are over. And,
right.
And it's like, wow, I mean, if you
no
hang
idea,
on
right?
until
Yeah.
30, you'll realize nobody cares how old you were when you graduated.
Right.
And in a lot of cases where you graduated from, I mean, it's
Mhm.
like, and just like high school, we feel like that whole culture and how we're perceived is so consequential. And, fast forward 5 years, you don't even think about those people anymore. And it's a pretty heavy time. It is. So, well, I'm glad you worked through that. And I appreciate that you're doing what you're doing with your life. And obviously I've devoted my life to helping people in this way. And I appreciate that you have too. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. Thank you.
It was a pleasure, Tom. Thank you.
Likewise. All right, there you have it, Dr. Todd Kammerzelt.
People of America, our Lord.
Great guy. So, hope you keep tuning in. I'm working on some promotions. Again, I want to remind you, if you don't mind taking an opportunity to fill out the listener survey, something that's going to be available in the show notes for several months to come. Just gathering information and trying to kind of hone in on the audience and see how I can make the show better. So subscribe, like, follow, whatever the case is, on Amazon, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Listen Notes, Overcast, Pandora, Podbay, Podcast Addict, Radio Public, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, and I'm sure there are other places out there. If you enjoy listening to the show, please take the time to leave a review or a rating or both on Apple Podcasts, preferably. But if you're not an Apple user, Podchaser is a great place to leave a review, or wherever you listen. If you know someone who would enjoy a particular episode or the show in general, please share it with them. If you have questions or comments, you can call the show and leave a voice message at 561-247-4757, or you can email us at thepathtooauthenticity@gmail.com. Love to hear from you and appreciate any feedback you might have to offer. For early access to the newest episode, for access to unedited interviews and other supplemental content, you can support the show for as little as $1 a month on Patreon. That's patreon.com/thepathtooauthenticity. I want to thank the band Punk Rock Opera, whose music is used throughout the show. Their songs are used with permission from the artist and under a Creative Commons license. And thank you to our sponsors, The Manor and Windrose Recovery. Thank you to Wendy Chin at Equivox. And the Path to Authenticity is proud to support the I Speak Media Foundation. Check it out. Can get more related content. Find all the episodes at thepathtooauthenticity.com. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Instagram. I'm starting to play around on Clubhouse a little bit. Elena Olander, who was on the show a while back, invited me, and I just, I got a little notice on my phone that Safa Kagan joined today, and got a chance to chat with her for a sec. She's in Morocco, so it's kind of fun. If you don't know anything about Clubhouse, check it out. Anyway, thanks again to Dr. Todd Kammerzelt. Hope you guys have a great week, Got some other audio stuff coming to you too. New stuff that I'm excited about. So be well and be nice.
We need a guitar player.
The Path to Authenticity is powered by Equivox. For digital marketing and web design services, visit equivox.com.